On today's Locked On Bucks, we take a look at a busy night in the NBA. Seemingly every team in the top 6 of the Eastern Conference, except for the Bucks, was in action, and it looked like the absolute best case scenario for the Bucks until the final few seconds in Cleveland. We'll explain what we mean. Take a look at a big 4-game West Coast road trip, what the expectations are for that trip, and more importantly, the health. When are the Bucks going to start to get healthy? We'll get into that conversation and much more coming up after this on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined by Camille Davis. You can hear me on the Bucks Radio Network and WTMJ here in Milwaukee. You can find Camille on the Technical Foul podcast and the Carry the G, everything that you're doing Packers related to. There is no off season for Camille, as one sport bleeds into the next. So you can find our work there. We both thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen each and every day, free and available wherever you get your podcasts and viewable on YouTube as well. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Camille, you and I were talking just before we started recording about a crazy ending in Cleveland between the Celtics and the Cavaliers. So let's just rewind a little bit. Coming into this game on Tuesday, you saw the news come out yesterday, Monday, just before the Bucks played that game against the Clippers. Kind of under the radar, hey, oh, by the way, don't pay attention to this, but here's the facts. Donovan Mitchell's going to be out at least 3 games, and it was just kind of a Trojan horse to mention PRP, which I don't know about you, but when I saw that, and that's what it was, you got the sense of, okay, I know you're going to miss at least 3 games, but it's going to be more than that. You would have to assume. You immediately looked at the schedule that the Cavaliers had as well and thought, boy, this is a big opportunity for the Bucks to start to get some distance between themselves and the Cavs. And look, we'll get to it. There's still a lot of challenges in the short-term schedule for the Cavaliers, but nobody has a schedule in the Eastern Conference like the Bucks do. The Phoenix Suns do, but nobody in the East. But the other games tonight, so you had the Cavs and the Celtics, and you figured here's a chance for the Bucks to get some separation. You also had the Knicks and the 76ers in action. As we tape this, the Pacers are playing. The Miami Heat nearly lost to the Detroit Pistons. So this was shaping up to be a night where when you look at the standings in the East and see Celtics, Bucks, and then after that, Cavs, Knicks, Sixers, Heat, Pacers, Magic in there as well, all of those teams, save for the Magic, potentially losing. Now, it didn't quite break that way, and the Cavs really spoiled things by beating the Celtics, which was one of those weird spots we were talking about of it puts Bucks fans in an unfamiliar spot to say, I think I have to root for the Celtics in this game.
Yeah, on Tech File tonight, we were actually just exploring the concept of the Boston Celtics and if what we're seeing in regular season is going to translate into the playoffs. And during the recording, I mentioned the fact, hey, Boston's playing Cleveland right now, so I'm going to say go Boston. Like, we need that win tonight. And I finished recording, I take a look, and I'm like, wait, Boston lost? And then I see that Dean Wade outscored the entire Celtics team in the fourth quarter by himself. And I'm just like, okay, well, that's the joke's on me for saying go Boston. And then next thing you know, for what? But yeah, this is the time of the year where the schedule watching makes you have some strange rooting interest where it's like the fan in me as a fan of the Bucks, a lover of Milwaukee, everything like that. You want Boston to lose. Like, I want Boston to lose. But then you see who they're playing. It's the Cavaliers, and Cleveland and Milwaukee is going back and forth for that 2 seed. So like, it's more beneficial if the Cavaliers lose this game rather than Boston losing, although like the Bucks fan in me will get more joy out of seeing the Celtics lose. But at this point in the season, like, it's about what helps out the Bucks. And Unfortunately, the Celtics could not do that for Milwaukee tonight. A disappointing loss. I have to go back and rewatch this, but I just can't. I still can't believe they lost that game, especially coming off the heels of such a dominant win against Golden State, where they
2
were
days off
everything
too.
went their way. Yeah, everything went
Yeah.
their way. So you come back the next game and then you lose to Cleveland in the fourth quarter, where it sounds like nothing was going Boston's way.
1 day off. Sorry. It's the Warriors that will have 2 days off to rebound against the Bucks tomorrow night. We'll get to, or tonight, depending on when you listen to this, we'll get to that in just a moment. But look, let's also point out, here's the positive. As I mentioned, the other teams that were playing, the Knicks lost, and the Sixers lost. So as we currently sit here, the Bucks just a half game up on the Cavs in the standings, both tied in the loss column. They both have 21 losses, but those losses by the Knicks and the Sixers dropped both of those teams to 26 losses on the season. So the Bucks are now 5 games up in the loss column on the 4th seeded Knicks and the 5th seeded 76ers. Magic have 26 losses as well. So we're going to have 3 teams essentially tied for 4th place in the East. But the Bucks do hold the head-to-head tiebreaker over both the Knicks and the 76ers. So, in other words, you're 6 games up with 20 games left against those 2 teams. Just for context, let's say the Bucks go 12-8 in their final 20 games of the season, which is entirely possible as we've continued to mention how difficult this schedule is. And as we'll get to, depending on the health of this team, 12-8 is entirely possible if the Bucks were to do that. The Sixers and Knicks, one of the 2 teams, would need to go 18-2 to pass the Bucks in the standings and move into that 3 spot. So still a month plus left in the regular season, but these 2 losses tonight go a long way in cementing the Bucks not dropping below 3rd in the Eastern Conference. And I've had a lot of people, point back or reach out and say, why does it matter where we finish? Who cares who we have to play? I agree for the most part. The large story of that, yes, like you're going to have to beat good teams. You're going to have to beat the Celtics at some point. But it's all about the journey there, that this gauntlet they're going through in the regular season, you don't want that in 4 consecutive series in the postseason. And I just go back to the year the Bucks won the title in 2021. You were a 3 seed, as we all remember. You didn't plan on having home court advantage after the first round. It didn't matter. You had it in the conference finals against the Atlanta Hawks, but you did not envision the Hawks getting that far. And that's the other part of it, is things happen. So again, if you can avoid all of those landmines, who knows what happens between then and the conference finals, should you get there. But my big thing was, you just don't want to be in a spot where you could potentially be playing as the 4 seed. And let's say your 5th seeded matchup is a Knicks team that's just getting healthy, or the 76ers that are just getting Joel Embiid back. Then you're guaranteed basically to have the Boston Celtics in the 2nd round. And then you have whoever comes out on the other end of that side of the bracket. So that's what you wanted to avoid. And I mention it because, Kevin Durant has mentioned this a couple of times too. Whenever anybody points out the toe on the line against the Bucks, and man, we were a Kevin Durant toe on the line away from the Nets winning the championship, he has been quick to point out, I don't think we would have won the title, that we were exhausted. We weren't healthy. You look at that Bucks series and everything it took out of him. Yeah. I don't think we had enough in us to get through another 2 series. And that's the big point here, is that's what you want to avoid. And finishing 2nd or 3rd goes a long way in avoiding that.
Yeah, 3rd is the absolute lowest that I would want to see the Bucks finish in the standings. But I do want your opinion on this, Justin, with the play-in tournament now being a part of the NBA postseason. And there's a subset of people who believe now that finishing in 3rd is actually a bit more beneficial.
I just had this conversation, the other day where, or not only that, 3rd, there's some benefits there. It's the, man, I can't believe we're going to make this case of, would you rather be the 2 seed when you even examine that, where you at least know what Tuesday or Wednesday, the team that you're going to be playing, versus waiting until I think it's Friday that you find out, okay, here's the team that we're going to play 2 days later.
Right. And it's not as much prep time. So do you subscribe to that where it's like, hey, it's not the end of the world to be in the three because of how the NBA has changed with the postseason tournament or
It's
play-in tournament?
not, and I also mean this with all due respect to the Cavaliers. It's not the end of the world to be the 3 seed if the Cleveland Cavaliers are the 2 seed. That they're a good team, obviously, right? And they present some matchup challenges, but they're a team that's still outside of Donovan Mitchell. They don't have a ton of postseason experience. I know that group was there in the playoffs last year. They didn't drape themselves in glory in that series against the New York Knicks. But that's, when you look up and down the standings in the East, I think, and again, I don't mean this as a sign of disrespect to the Cavs, but I think if you surveyed, if we did the Tim Bontemps straw poll for MVP and you did that for, okay, rank the teams in the Eastern Conference, I don't know that anybody would have the Cavaliers as the second best team. I think you would have the New York Knicks in front of the Cavaliers. I think you would even have, look, if you guarantee me that Joel Embiid is going to be back and healthy, I'll take the 76ers over the Cavaliers in the postseason. So that's another caveat of, if that's who the 2 seed is, I don't think the 3 seed is all that bad. The big difference, though, is, this is not the Eastern Conference that we've seen in recent years where
Eastern Conference days.
yeah, I mean, for the last, decade, basically, up until the last couple of years, longer than a decade, actually, you would really just look at the 4-5 matchup in the East and say, okay, here's where it's a toss-up. Maybe 3 versus 6 is a competitive series, but it's not one where you would think the 3 seed might be in trouble here. There's still a lot of fluid movement in the standings here in the Eastern Conference. I think, again, just as we added the disclaimer of don't mean this to slight the Cavs, I'll add the same thing to the Magic here. But I think if you asked any team, who's the team that, if I give you your choice, these are the options in the first round, who would you choose? I think the Orlando Magic would probably be the team that most teams chose as their preferred matchup.
Probably.
Great defense, very good defense. Where's the offense going to come from in the half court in the postseason is certainly the question. And at this moment, the Bucks have a pretty good chance at getting the Orlando Magic. And that's really the difficult part of these standings is there isn't a clear indication. As I just mentioned, the Knicks, Sixers, and Magic are all tied in the loss column. So are the Miami Heat. And the Pacers are 2 games back of that. So it could be any one of those 5 teams that the Bucks are playing, regardless of where their draw is in the first round.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's 2 games separating 5 different teams right now in the East. So like you mentioned, that jumble right now with the 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 seed, like no idea how that's going to fall out because from game to game, it's going to fluctuate between those 5 teams there. And then again, you have Milwaukee and Cleveland kind of battling out for that 2 seed. So it's going to be a fun finish to the season where I feel like the rooting interest of Bucks fans will be very different every single night. Just given the fact that you want to see Cleveland lose, you want to continue to see the Knicks lose. The Magic, I mean, people might not cheer as hard with that one where they're like, I don't really care. But I mean, the Magic are up there. So you want to continue to have as much separation as you possibly can get between that bottom tier of the 3 seed and then what's coming at 4, 5, 6, so on and so forth, because you don't want to see the Bucks fall that far into the standings, which we've talked about how difficult their schedule is. But they've been playing so well, 8-2 over the last 10. You hope to see that momentum going. But as they approach this road trip, and we have some question marks about health as well, like it gets a little bit more fuzzy about how the Bucks might finish this road trip and then continue on throughout the rest of this season.
We'll get into a couple of other things coming up here. One I did not mention at the top, and I'm going to spring on you here, a total surprise move, Camille, but get your feedback on something that's coming up this week in a different league and some of the differences we see there and how things would change if we saw the same in the NBA. But coming up after the break, we will get into the health situation for the Bucks. Don't have any solid update on Giannis. We do have one, at least short term, on Chris Middleton. So we'll get into that conversation coming up after the break on Locked On Bucks. Passion, drive, and patience. They are what bring home a winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed or power, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts, 122 million for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can also find it on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV Channels app. Locked On Sports Today. Find it 24/7 covering the top stories of the day, plus all the national stories and leagues that are out there. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Camille, the updates that we do have, Chris Middleton is out today, Wednesday, against the Golden State Warriors. Look, and I know Eric Name asked Doc Rivers about this before the game against the Clippers on Monday, trying to seek some clarity whether or not there was some type of setback. I think a lot of it has to do with the back and forth that Eric had very early in this season with Adrian Griffin. But Doc Rivers did say, no, there was no type of setback. I do know he has gone through practice, and I do think Doc Rivers confirmed that as well. He has indicated, look, we're just making sure he's absolutely 100% and taking our time with him. He did say over the weekend, Chris feels good. A lot of the I don't know that he said pain, maybe discomfort, but he feels good. A lot of that is gone, but he continues, Doc Rivers does, to preach, I don't care about right now. Like, I feel like we're getting better. We're not there. It's nice that we're winning yet or now, but it's still a work in progress. But what I care about is the playoffs, and is April, May, and June, and that's what we especially need Chris Middleton for. Maybe it's just naivete and hope that I'm drowning in here, but I do believe a lot of this is just, we don't need him yet. We're playing fine, and let's make sure he's 110% before we bring him back, just so we know he's good to go for the playoffs.
Absolutely. And that is the frame of mind that I would also take. That's something that I'm cool with. I'm excited about. Like, I've seen people wonder, like, it's been about a month since we've seen Chris Middleton play with an ankle injury. Like, what kind of ankle injury is this? And it's like, I mean, there's different degrees of sprains. Like, every ankle injury is not the same. Just because we see Giannis and his Wolverine abilities at times to turn his ankle terribly and be back in a day or two, like, that's not how everybody is built. And you have to acknowledge the genetics piece of that. And on top of that, again, there are different degrees of ankle sprains. Like, they're all not created equal. And clearly we saw, immediately when he got hurt, we saw him coming up limp. And that's the time when, after an ankle injury, right after it happens, is when it's going to feel the best, quote unquote, until, the pain starts to happen. The swelling can start happening because it's still fresh. So you still have a little bit more flexibility in that ankle, but it's always the next day where it's bad. And we saw during that Suns game when Chris trying to play through that ankle twist, like, you could tell already, like, oh, he twisted his ankle pretty bad. He does not look the same. He's not moving around the same. So whatever it takes for him to get back to full health, especially given the various injuries that he's been working back from over the last couple of seasons, like, do that. I don't really care how long it takes, as long as when he comes back, they can say, like, he's in the best shape that he can be in coming off of this particular injury at this time. Like, it's never a guarantee that anything's going to work, that anyone's going to stay healthy. You hope for that. Again, we mentioned, like, that's a piece of winning a championship. You need good injury luck. And I love the fact that Doc Rivers is focused on making sure that this team is playing its best ball, that they're as healthy as possible come playoff time when they really need guys to ramp up minutes. So, like, with Chris Middleton, as long as he continues on the path great to hear that he's had no setbacks. It's just them taking their time, being cautious. I'm here for all that. I don't mind that at all. And I know we're going to talk a bit about Giannis and what's going on with the Achilles soreness that he's faced. But again, I want them to be as healthy as possible come April, May, June. So like whatever time they need to take right now to rest, I'm here for that. Even if that means they do drop to the 3 seed because of that, like it's going to be in play because the Cavaliers are still winning, as we just talked about in the first segment. So health over everything for me is always going to be first priority.
Yeah, and we don't know what the severity was. I mean, it was probably we're obviously not medical professionals here, but
Right.
it's probably at least a grade 2 sprain that he was dealing with, just for the fact that he was in a walking boot and on crutches leaving the arena. I believe those are typically 4 to 6 weeks that you're looking at. This is, I believe, 4 weeks out from when that injury occurred. So it's right along that timeline, even if it's not until after this road trip. Again, to me, the big thing, and I think it seems like you're aligned with this, is we're not suggesting, look, as long as he's healthy, you don't need him for the rest of the regular season. You still need to get Chris Middleton out there because of the changes. And I know we've mentioned quite a bit, Doc Rivers hasn't come in and thrown out the playbook and said, we're doing this instead, but he has changed the way you do things on both ends of the floor. So you still need some of that continuity, and you need minutes with Chris to build that up once again, especially for Damian Lillard. But if that comes the last 2 weeks of the regular season, 3 weeks of the regular season, maybe not ideal in terms of where you finish in the standings. But again, the help that you've gotten up until this point has gone a long way. If we go back, 2 weeks, Camille, to some of the conversations that were taking place around this team going into the All-Star break, when we kept the receipts of everybody that suggested the Bucks were going to slide into the play-in tournament after that loss to the Memphis Grizzlies, and yet here we are, the Bucks still tied for the second best record in the Eastern Conference. So it's nice that it's not as much on the forefront because of the injuries that the Knicks have had and the up and down play from those other teams around you. Look, if that wasn't the case, and if we're still talking about a Bucks team that at this moment is 2 games, 3 games back of the Cavaliers, and you have the Knicks a game or 2 behind you, then it's a much different conversation, but we at least don't have to be having that right now.
Yeah, so you take every game as they come based on how this, like, you can't already look ahead and say like, okay, well, in 2 weeks we're going to aim to do, like, you don't know how it's going to shake out. You just have to go based on what the training staff is saying regarding their health, and what's going to be best for them. I did hear Doc mention the fact that, because I try not to get into the training, I tried to stay out of what they're going to tell. I just kind of asked them like, hey, are we on track? Is it moving the right way? And if it is, it is. If it isn't, it isn't. But I'm not going to insert myself in there and say, well, he has to be ready by this date because we need it. And he's like, I understand. He has the perspective and just the general idea of like, I know what we're playing here for. Again, it's not ideal if, Chris only gets a couple of weeks to reintegrate himself back into the lineup. I've seen a lot of people have concerns about how to reintegrate him into the lineup, if it makes more sense for Chris to come off the bench, which I don't think it does. Like, we have the numbers throughout the season of how dominant that starting 5 has been. I don't think there's any reason to overthink that. I will say in regards to just injuries as well, it was nice to see that Jay Crowder wasn't listed on the injury report after he tweaked his knee a bit in the game against the Clippers, where we only saw him play about 18 minutes. So hearing that Jay is good was also some good news, but we do have to still wait to see how things shake out with Giannis. And of course, as we mentioned already with Chris.
Yeah, and that's the update. There is no update on Giannis, that he is once again listed as questionable for that game against the Golden State Warriors. Look, if he plays great, I think at this point you have to approach the Warriors game, probably the Lakers game on Friday too, saying, let's just plan on not seeing Giannis. If we do, great. But let's approach this thinking, going to have to win with our defense, in another way for Damian Lillard to really be in the spotlight and get going. Because as you and I had talked about, and Frank before too, that was really that stretch of play where Dame started to get going earlier in the season. When Giannis missed that game against the Raptors, Dame came out, looked great. The ball movement was there. And then that kind of propelled Damian Lillard for the rest of the month of November and into December. And look, it's not as though Damian Lillard has been bad, but maybe that's another thing. We saw a very good game from Dame against the Clippers, and maybe having to carry that load is something that gets him going here if you, in fact, do not have Giannis once again for the start of this road trip against the Warriors and potentially even more. Speaking of that road trip, our expectations for the road trip and that other what if that I was going to surprise Camille with, we'll get into that after this on Locked On Bucks. Well, this episode of Locked On Bucks is sponsored by BetterHelp. And look, as we've gone through at the start of the year, that's really one of the big times when we all look into bettering ourselves with setting some type of resolution. Sometimes you just need to get some things off your chest, though. It may not be any grand resolutions of ways to improve. You just want those small incremental wins and ways to get better and better yourself. That is where BetterHelp comes into play. You can find anything that you're looking to improve. BetterHelp can help you address those areas that you're looking for. It is very, very easy to get started. If you're thinking of giving therapy a try, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. That's the ease that I'm speaking to. It's designed to be fit around your schedule. We're all busy. We all have moving parts outside of the workday. You can squeeze in BetterHelp around anything you have within your schedule. And most importantly, you can change. You can find a new therapist and find anybody else change along the way at no additional charge. Again, BetterHelp is designed to be flexible and suited to fit your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA and get 10% off your first month. It's BetterHelp.com. BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, Camille, before we do get into expectations for this 4-game road trip, I saw Mark Stein mention this earlier today. So I am also a hockey fan, even though my St. Louis Blues aren't doing too great this year. But Friday is the trade deadline in the National Hockey League. The NBA and the NHL both play 82-game schedules. The NHL starts before the NBA does. Now it starts earlier and earlier. And we had the NBA trade deadline February 8th. The NHL trade deadline is March 8th. They both end right around the same time, mid-April, that their schedules wrap up. The NHL season started about 2 weeks earlier than the NBA season does. And yet their trade deadline goes all the way until March 8th. So basically all the way until your final month of the season. And then you have your trade deadline. So if we did that with the NBA and pushed things back until this Friday, where the trade deadline would be, do you think, and I understand this is fully putting you on the spot, does that change any approach that we saw by any of these teams? In other words, are there any teams that say, man, if we would have known we'd be here a month ago, maybe we would have been more aggressive, or maybe we would have looked to have offloaded some deals?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you have an extra month, then that means you have an extra month to figure out what your team needs are and if you want to pull the trigger. So you just have a little bit more time to think. But my first thought went to, like, how would that affect the buyout market? Like, I'm not a big hockey fan.
Basically, you'd have to do.
So is there like a buyout market in hockey? Is that just an NBA? No. Okay.
Yeah. It's
so
just,
like that's like that's the piece of it where I would be interested to see how that goes.
The buyout market is the final week of the regular season.
Right. Like then it's like the schedule gets a little wonky there, but yeah, it just gives teams an extra month. I don't think I would enjoy that as month because like with the way the season is with 82 games, understanding hockey is about the same schedule, but with 82 games, getting like that first 60 out ish around that mark, and then figure out, okay, well, hey, maybe 55, 60. And then it's like, hey, here's a trade deadline now for your last quarter of your games. Like this is your new team. And then you have the extraness of the buyout market where you have to have all that done by March 1st. And then if you're already waived by that point, you can sign with any playoff contending team and be eligible for playoff minutes. Like I do like that system in there as well. So I don't think I would be a fan of extending it that far out to that close to the end of the season, but I did not know hockey got down like that. Like I'm not a big hockey fan, but if I had to, my team always say, I follow them on Twitter too, even though I don't watch hockey, but my team is the Detroit Red Wings.
Okay.
From I lived in Michigan one random year in like 98. And at that time, the Red Wings was all over.
I mean, that was peak of my hatred for the Red Wings.
all over. So that's all I saw around town. So I was like, yeah, let's get
Yeah.
down with that. Came back to Milwaukee and never really thought too much about hockey therein. But,
98, I believe, was the year that Stevie Y eliminated the Blues in the first round with that shot in overtime. But yeah, that was the interesting part is you got a month of here's your trade deadline, figure out everything out. I don't think it changes the approach of teams just because of really the play-in tournament. I think that's
yeah,
changed
true too.
a lot of what we've seen with the trade deadline, that there's more teams that are in it now. And especially, this draft class, it's not viewed as what we had last year, obviously. So even there's less of an impetus of, well, maybe if we get into the play-in tournament, fine, we'll get the gate revenue potentially for one home postseason game, but there's not as much of a demand for us to really start to tank here unless you're already in the spot of where the Pistons and Wizards are. That's another big piece of it too. When you have teams that are as historically bad as those two teams have been, it's another thing that kind of zaps your chances. I know it's basically four-way chance to get that one seed, but still, I think that and the play-in tournament has changed a lot of the approach, and I don't know if extending the trade deadline would change much of anything other than if you're one of those players that's traded from a contender to a bad team, it's probably more palatable when it's just a month that you got to deal with this.
Yeah, not as much time. I know. I think of Jeff Teague and Jeff Teague is wow. But he said there's nothing worse than being traded from one sorry team to another sorry team. He's like, at that point, you're just like, I don't know what to do at this point. But to your point, there's only a month left, and you're like, well, at least I can already start booking summer vacation. But yeah, I think the extra month would just give teams another month of data, a chance to evaluate, see if they want to make certain moves. And who knows, having more time also, you're probably going to be in a different spot than you might have been a month before. So if you're a buyer or a seller, it might change at that point. So like the fundamentals are all going to be the same, I would think. It would just affect the buyout market, push that back pretty late, and then just give teams a little bit more time to figure things out if they want to pull the trigger or not.
Basically the trade that we saw earlier this year with one of the newest members of the Bucks, Danilo Gallinari, where he went from the Wizards to the Pistons, the two teams with the worst records in the league. So for this 4-game road trip, as we start to wrap things up here, the caveat is we don't know, right? With the health of this team, that's going to go a long way in setting expectations for this. But I made this point elsewhere that these, and I hesitate to even say this, but these 4 matchups on paper, it seems like, wait, these are the better teams when you look at the 2 trips that they had.
Mm-hmm.
But it does seem in many ways like the first West Coast road trip was the more challenging trip, when even leaving the whole Doc Rivers and coaching change as the trip is starting piece out of it. You were on the road in Denver, where it's always a tough place to play, and it's a very good team and a team that has been very good against the Bucks, especially Nikola Jokic. Mm-hmm. Phoenix and Utah have been 2 places that have not been historically kind to the Bucks. You also had nobody available essentially other than Giannis for that Phoenix Suns game. So those were the challenges, and even Dallas and Luka Doncic, there's some challenges there, but especially the Bucks history in Utah, the Bucks history in Phoenix and Denver, those really tough spots. And especially going from Dallas, from one extreme, from the Midwest out to the West in Utah was another component of it. Here it's all in LA, essentially, where you're in Southern California, San Francisco, LA, and then Sacramento, more Northern California. But still, it's all within one state where you're going to be. And these are 4 teams that I think the Bucks match up very well against. It's a Warriors team that has been playing better. A lot of that has been some of the young guys and Jonathan Kuminga and what he's been doing recently. They're without Andrew Wiggins once again. Klay Thompson, a lot of the conversations we've had about Chris Middleton, it's been the same with Klay Thompson. You still have Steph Curry, but that's it, right? Like, not to take everything away from that team, but when you think of the traditional Warriors, that's it. It's Steph Curry keeping that together as much as he can. The Kings, who you wrap up the road trip with, I think that's another team the Bucks match up pretty well against. They had that win against the Kings on the infamous Damian Lillard buzzer beater. But let us not forget, that was a game where we really started to question some of the things we saw in terms of execution down the stretch with this team and some of their decision-making down the stretch in that game that opened up the door for overtime. And then you have the two Los Angeles teams. The Lakers are going to carry a lot of name brand importance, but that's a team, again, Bucks match up pretty well against when you look at the secondary scores on that team, and you just beat the Clippers. So long story short, I do think these are pretty favorable matchups for the Bucks. And if they are healthy, I would go as far as saying I would expect them to go 3-1 in these 4 games if they were healthy with the way they're playing now. Unfortunately, we don't know how healthy they're going to be. So you have to throw all that out the window.
Yeah, it's as favorable as it can be if you're on a road trip playing against only competition that is currently in the postseason chase. So all of the teams that we're playing are going to be at least play-in level teams according to the standings right now. And we mentioned the Warriors. They're coming off of a really embarrassing loss. So you have to add that. But they had rest as well. So the Warriors are a team, as well as we know, historically has played better at home than they do on the road. Although this season at home, they're a little bit closer to 500 than most people probably even realize because of what you think of when you think of Warriors basketball and being at home and what that looks like for them. But it's going to be a Warriors team that's motivated. When you heard Steph Curry mention, like, hey, we used to be doing that to other teams, like, and now we're on the other side of catching some of these beatdowns, and you know they're going to have something to prove. So it's not going to be easy, especially without Giannis. And I always feel like Giannis has great games against the Warriors. Like, that's one I always love to see. So I hope that he's healthy, but if not, they're going to just have to figure out a way around that. You come out of that Warriors game and you go to LA, like you mentioned. Lakers are definitely bigger in name than they are right now, which is how they've been playing. But you can't overlook them either because, I mean, it is a team that just beat the Thunder. Like, they can play up, they can play down. D'Angelo Russell is cooking that night. It adds a different element to their team. Like, if what Bron is going to be Bron, if AD comes out playing his, defensive player of the year, worthy type of defense for this team, like, they're going to be tough. But again, that's a matchup that Giannis always seems to get up for. He loves playing against LeBron, the AD matchup. So we'll see if he's going to be healthy for that. The Clippers, again, they're going to be looking for some get back, given the fact that they just lost to the Bucks in Milwaukee. They mentioned how, they felt the zone junk things up, and watching them play, I haven't watched a lot of Clippers games, but I was like, man, this is a really ISO pick and roll heavy team. So like, I can see why a zone really got into your head when you're playing so much ISO ball. So we'll see how they try to pivot from there. And then of course you end with the Kings, who were a great story last year, upstart team in the West. Again, you're looking at their record and you're like, okay, 5-5 over the last 10. Haven't been playing as well, but they have the pieces to make any competition difficult on you. So like, the Bucks are going to have to come out and they're going to play some good ball, but health assuming, 3-1 would be an excellent road trip, in my opinion. I wouldn't be mad at a 2-2 road trip from the Bucks. Anything less than 2-2, I will be disappointed regardless of what the health is of this team.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose if you don't have Giannis and Chris for all 4 of those games, then you reevaluate things. But for the most part, I'm with you. Of 2-2 is kind of the bare minimum, if for no other reason than the expectations that the Bucks have set and how they've started to raise the floor once again with the way that they're playing. And I mean, it's entirely ISO ball for the Clippers. Ty Lue went as far as saying that before the game on Monday. And I remember thinking the same thing. Man, this seems before the game, like this seems like a lot of ISO ball. I've only seen bits and pieces of Clippers games, and Ty Lue was asked about ball movement, to basically tiptoeing around hey coach, it seems like you guys run a lot of isolation. Like, how important is ball movement? And even Ty Lue kind of dismissed it and said, I don't really care about ball movement. The only time that it's really critical is when double teams start, and then it's more a matter of getting the ball to the open person and exploiting that matchup. So it is something that the Clippers have embraced. They will certainly have some revenge on their minds in that game, but it is the second time the Bucks will have played the Clippers where it is day 2 of a back-to-back for the Clippers. Though this one, they're in at home for both of those games. They host, I think, the Bulls Saturday afternoon again. So it's not like it's a night game into afternoon game, and then against the Bucks on Sunday. So that'll be a revenge game. I'm sure it'll be a revenge game for Mike Brown as well, who was ejected in that win against the Kings earlier. But we will be back with some late night / I suppose early morning
Early
post-game
morning is
shows
favorite,
coming up this week. It's everybody's favorite part of the schedule, late night Milwaukee Bucks games. And how about that schedule too, Camille? You knew coming out of the break, and when the schedule was released, we knew, okay, we got a West Coast trip here shortly after the All-Star break where we're going to have 3 9:00 tips. You prepare for that. You know, okay, there's usually 4 or 5 of those throughout the course of a year. But then the schedule gods just said, you know what? Let's also turn 2 Midwest games consecutive weeks into 9:00 tips. 3 straight Friday nights that the Bucks are tipping off at 9:00. I suppose the good news is it's a Friday night, not a Tuesday night or a Wednesday night.
Right. Yeah, that's the best news of it.
We'll be back. We'll have to figure out when, but we'll be back with the post-game show recapping game 1 of this road trip, the Bucks and the Golden State Warriors. We'll see if there's any updates along the way throughout the day, too, on the status of Giannis, that we do know no Chris Middleton for at least the start of the road trip. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.